Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Rumbling sounds filled Bai Xiaochun's mind and spread through his entire body. His expression flickered as he realized that boundless life force was flowing through him. This life force conformed with his undying live forever technique, and therefore, met no obstacle within him. It almost seemed like it belonged with his cultivation base, and as a result, it only took a brief moment for his withered and nearly destroyed body to be almost completely healed. During the process, his fleshly body power skyrocketed. In the blink of an eye, he went from chi condensation to foundation establishment and then core formation. As it happened, his undying skin, undying heavenly king, and undying tendons, all recovered completely. Furthermore, Bai Xiaochun could sense that this version of the Undying Codex was somehow different than what he had cultivated before. It was stronger, the life force was more vibrant, and its energy was the type that could shake heaven and earth. Were it not for his previous experiences, it would have been difficult to detect. But considering how many years he had cultivated the Undying Codex, the sensation of fusing with this new energy left him completely shocked. If his previous mastery of the undying skin had led to him to a level of 100% of his possible battle prowess, then after recovering now, it had increased to 150%. It was a terrifying upgrade which would make him vastly more powerful than anyone in the same cultivation level as himself. It could only be described as heaven-defying. And it all came from the two skeletons which had turned into ash and then become a consummate undying live forever pill. Apparently, this amazing pill was not just helping him recover his fleshly body and life force. It was also refining him in an incredible way. Now, his fleshly body power didn't just match someone who had the pure blood of the arch-emperors, it surpassed it. Cracking sounds echoed out as his undying tendons solidified, and he rose rapidly through the levels of the undying bones. Within mere moments, he had reached the great circle. He looked almost completely recovered. His hair was now back, long and full, and instead of being skinny and emaciated, he thrummed with vitality. The cracks on his skin were gone, and furthermore, he glowed with golden light. Anyone who could see him in this moment would definitely be shaken by the holy air that he exuded. At this point, he passed from the undying bones into the undying blood level. More cracking sounds echoed out as his blood once again transformed into undying blood. That in turn aided in his regeneration, making it speed up even more. The entire third level of the city around him was stained the color of blood, mixed within which was a tinge of gold. After about 10 breaths of time passed, his veins were completely filled with undying blood, and a tremor passed through him. As of this moment, the sensation of fleshly body power that existed within him surpassed anything from before. Rumble, early demigod realm, mid-realm, late realm, great circle. As the cracking sounds continued, his battle prowess rose higher and higher, to degrees difficult to even imagine. Bai Xiaochun couldn't be absolutely sure, but he was fairly certain that, despite the fact that he currently had no cultivation base, his fleshly body power was far, far higher than it had been before. The last time he had reached the great circle of the Undying Codex, he had only become a demigod in fleshly body, and only the early realm at that. But now, things were completely different. It came very close to being the same as the difference between heaven and earth. Although he could feel the pressure of the world weighing down on him, it wasn't very shocking at all. Furthermore, he felt like, if he wanted to, he could will himself to grow to incredible physical height. He could become as large as the original blood ancestor. This was the true Undying Codex. This was what the descendants of the original Arch-Emperor had cultivated, a technique which gave them the power to prop up heaven and earth. Bai Xiaochun was even fairly certain that he was now stronger than the blood ancestor himself. Normally speaking, these developments would have elated him. However, at this moment, his heart was as cold as ice. The death of Bai Hao had filled him with pain that couldn't possibly be wiped away. Things aren't over yet, the gravekeeper said softly. After the Undying Codex is the Live Forever Codex. Even as the words left his mouth, Bai Xiaochun spasmed. Although the medicinal pill had been 80% absorbed, there was still 20% left, which contained energy that did not belong to the Undying Codex. And now, that power erupted. It was the energy of the Live Forever Codex. As that power spread through him, Bai Xiaochun realized that it was familiar. A twinge of pain stabbed through him, the source being that scrap of power from the Live Forever Codex. Boo, he murmured. The life force from the Live Forever Codex poured into the scrap of energy inside of him, which then began to grow. Within only a few breaths of time, the live forever power caused his energy passageways to thrum, and his cultivation base to rise to the foundation establishment level. This type of foundation establishment surpassed his previous Heaven Dao foundation establishment. This was Live Forever Foundation Establishment. The moment he reached the level of Live Forever Foundation Establishment, he sensed the 5 seals of the human body. A boom echoed out, and the first seal was destroyed. At that point, the remaining 20% of the power of the medicinal pill continued to flow through him, propelling him toward a Live Forever core. Listen well, Bai Xiaochun, the gravekeeper said as he passed his cultivation base, life force and everything about himself into Bai Xiaochun. Thanks to the power of the magical item that was Arch-Emperor City, he was able to continue to push Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base higher, even beyond what the energy of the medicinal pill could do. Then, his voice echoed with focus and determination as he spoke his last words. I know you have many questions. And I know you hate me. Furthermore, you are surely curious why I didn't just comply with the Celestial and let him leave this world. The reason is that this world actually has no world gate. The so-called world gate is nothing more than a fabrication I invented specifically for the Celestial. His words echoed out like peals of heavenly thunder into Bai Xiaochun's mind. What? Despite the fact that his cultivation base was rising rapidly, his mind was in complete chaos. If there was a world gate, the gravekeeper continued, I would have opened it long ago and let the Celestial leave. There would have been no need for this complicated plan of mine. The whole reason for all of this is because there is no world gate. It is entirely possible for the living beings in this world to leave it. In fact, there are actually 2 ways. The first would be for someone with the blood of the Arch-Emperors to cultivate the undying live forever technique all the way to the Mahayana realm, and become a celestial. The world net which binds this world would not be able to resist a true celestial, and would collapse. However, what would also collapse in that scenario, would be the entire world in which we live. All of the mountains and rivers, all of heaven and earth. At that time, the celestial level Arch-Emperor would gather up all of the living beings from the destroyed world, all of his people, and bring them with him as he left. In the wider world outside, the Arch-Emperor dynasty would then continue to prosper. The gravekeeper spoke quickly, ensuring that his words battered at Bai Xiaochun's mind without stop. Furthermore, they were finally revealing a profound and tightly kept secret. It was in this moment that Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base broke through from the Live Forever Foundation establishment level. At that point, something new appeared within him. It was a Live Forever core. As his Live Forever core took shape, the second of the seals appeared, and was destroyed. It was also in that moment that the power of the medicinal pill began to falter. Clearly, it could not push him to the level of a Live Forever nascent soul. Therefore, it was now the gravekeeper's cultivation base that erupted with power and continued to bolster the power within him that could live forever. The Undying Codex surpassed all other body refinement techniques in this heaven and earth. Similarly, the Live Forever Codex surpassed all other divine abilities and cultivation practices. Even someone as confident as the Celestial would have no choice but to stay silent in the face of the Live Forever Codex. From the frigid matriarch and Du Lingfei, it was possible to see how shocking the Live Forever Codex was. Of course, Bai Xiaochun had never fought Du Lingfei, but he was now very familiar with her energy and power. Now, as the energy of the Live Forever Codex flowed through him, he couldn't help but gasp. For one thing, the gravekeeper's words were shocking to the core. In addition to that, though, with the power of the Live Forever Codex inside of him, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth that existed in this world suddenly seemed weaker. In fact, Bai Xiaochun also got the sensation that, with this power, he was like the monarch of all the peoples of this world. All he had to do was exercise a single thought, and all entities in the world would lend him their cultivation base power. Although it wouldn't increase his own cultivation base, it would allow him to crush almost any opponent. Clearly, neither Du Lingfei nor the frigid matriarch had ever cultivated the Live Forever Codex to the point of manifesting a divine ability like this. This was something that came only if someone mastered the Undying Codex first. As the gravekeeper had said, before Bai Xiaochun, the only people to have ever cultivated this technique were the Arch-Emperors. As Bai Xiaochun reeled in mute shock, the gravekeeper continued, his voice weak and hoarse. There is a second way to leave, and that is with the battle prowess of a celestial. One wouldn't need to be a true celestial, but would need power of that level. Someone that powerful could simply destroy the world, and thus leave it. Bai Xiaochun only continued to feel more shaken with every moment that passed, to the point where he almost didn't notice that he had reached the live forever nascent soul stage. The third seal appeared, even more resilient than the previous ones, and yet it was also absolutely powerless to prevent itself from being destroyed. As his cultivation base rose higher and higher, Bai Xiaochun was certain that a mere thought on his part could cause winds to scream in the area, and the sky to grow dim. The gravekeeper was trembling as his energy faded. He panted for breath as his eyes grew cloudier. And yet, he continued to pour everything he had into Bai Xiaochun, causing his cultivation base to rise higher and higher. Rumbling sounds could be heard as Bai Xiaochun's live forever nascent soul emerged, and began to climb toward the live forever diva realm. Both methods involved destroying the world. As for all of the living beings within the world, they would be ejected out into the wider world beyond. The gravekeeper was weak beyond measure now, but he gritted his teeth and continued with his explanation, as if to provide a defense for everything he had done in his life. There are only two options, Bai Xiaochun. So you tell me, could I really just destroy the world to let the celestial out? As for Ghost Mother, she possessed the coordinates to this world all along, which was why she could leave. It would not have been possible for her to take someone as powerful as the celestial past the world net. My mission is still not complete. I must create a celestial via the undying live forever technique, or perhaps a quasi-celestial. Without that person, how could I possibly agree to destroy the world? As his voice echoed out, he began to fade away. Despite how his energy flagged, he gritted his teeth and drew upon his scant remaining cultivation base and life force, as well as the powers of the precious treasure that was Arch-Emperor City, to transform his own energy into live forever power that Bai Xiaochun could absorb. As a result, Bai Xiaochun broke through into the live forever diva realm, a level which surpassed his previous heaven Dao level by far. At this point, the fourth sealing mark of the live forever codex appeared, and was destroyed. After his breakthrough, the live forever power within him continued to surge. The next watershed mark was the live forever demigod realm. Live forever demigod realm. Live forever demigod. The gravekeeper chuckled weakly. Although he was fading away into nothing, he still refused to give up, a fact which was evidenced by the happiness and contentment within his laughter. Bai Xiaochun, I will use my last bit of energy to push you into the live forever demigod realm. I only regret that I cannot use the power of this world to push your undying live forever technique all the way into the true celestial realm. I suppose that a quasi-celestial will still do. Laughing contentedly, he performed an incantation gesture with his left hand and pointed out, Arch-Emperor Treasure. All of Arch-Emperor City began to tremble, filling the hearts of the people inside it with shock. That included the Grand Heaven Master, the Arch-Emperor, and the 4 heavenly kings, as well as the heavenly dukes and marquises. Even more shocking was that all of the heavenly marquis pagodas and heavenly duke pagodas simultaneously collapsed. A shocking energy burst into the third portion of the city, pouring into the gravekeeper and then passing through him into Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun felt like his mind was being struck by lightning, and he could barely breathe. Massive amounts of energy pushed into him, causing his live forever power to climb higher and higher. In the blink of an eye, he went from the early diva realm to the Great Circle. Then, the live forever power converged and prepared for a final assault. Boom! Bai Xiaochun felt like the world was spinning. Crashing booms filled him with heaven-rending, earth-crushing intensity as his cultivation base broke through again. The live forever demigod. This was the final level of the live forever codex. The final sealing mark of the live forever codex appeared, and was crushed with impunity. Bai Xiaochun trembled as every portion of his body seemed to link to each other perfectly. The time had come for the gravekeeper to meet his ultimate end. His right hand was already transforming into ash. The magical power of Arch-Emperor Dynasty seemed incapable of fully transforming into live forever power. Bai Xiaochun's place in the live forever codex was equivalent to the early demigod realm, and seemed incapable of progressing further. However, things were not over yet. It was at this point that Bai Xiaochun's demigod cultivation base began to fuse with his undying codex fleshly body. When that fusion was finished, the undying live forever technique would be whole. If he had achieved all of this by normal cultivation, there would have been no need to fuse them. That process would have occurred naturally along the way. But now, a proper fusion was vitally important. Bai Xiaochun trembled violently, a look of fear flickering on his face as he sat there cross-legged, incapable of moving. He was fully concentrated on fusing the complete undying live forever technique, to the point where his consciousness began to fade. The undying live forever technique became like a vortex trying to suck him into it, to completely transform him, to make him the ultimate successor of the undying live forever technique. He was not an arch-emperor. He surpassed the arch-emperors. As his consciousness faded, his heart filled with complicated emotions. At that point, he looked over at the gravekeeper and noticed that the man was smiling. As he smiled, the gravekeeper began to fade away as surely as if some huge hand were erasing him out of existence. Mission accomplished, he murmured. Looking at Bai Xiaochun for the final time, he clasped hands in respect. He felt guilty about what he had done to Bai Xiaochun, but not guilty about his overall success. He knew that the day would soon come when Taoist Heavenspan realized the truth about how to leave the world. At that time, a deadly battle would surely take place, which would end in the destruction of the world. The gravekeeper's mission had been to ensure that, before the world ended, a celestial appeared who had cultivated the undying live forever technique to completion. Or at the very least, a quasi-celestial. He couldn't stop Taoist Heavenspan, but he could ensure that such a quasi-celestial appeared before the end of the world. It was all to simply accomplish his mission. To do that, he would use anyone and everyone in any way he could. He clasped hands respectfully, and bowed. It was a bow he never rose up from. Bai Xiaochun watched as he transformed completely into ash. A long moment passed. Bai Xiaochun was wrapped up in the undying live forever technique, and yet, he still managed to murmur, "I still hate you." As the process of completing the fusion of the undying live forever technique was going on, war still raged outside. And the fierce fighting at Heavenspan Island had not yet ended. The entire world was gripped with madness and slaughter. Although this war between the lands of Heavenspan and the Wildlands had only been going on for a few years now, in terms of the bitterness of the struggle, it was something the likes of which had never occurred before in the history of this world. A great war had been fought when Taoist Heavenspan rebelled against the Arch-Emperor dynasty. The dynasty had fallen, and what remained of it had fled to the Wildlands. But not even that war could compare to this one. Never before had a war been fought in which so many cultivators died in such a short period of time. It virtually defied imagination. The Wildlands was the battleground, and it had long since been stained crimson with blood. The aura of death and the stench of gore was so intense that not even the most powerful of winds could dispel it. More than half of the cultivators from the 4 regions of the lands of Heavenspan were dead. Were it not for the strict control maintained by the Celestial, such a high death rate would have already destroyed the morale of the Heavenspan cultivators. Devas fell in battle left and right, to the point where among the Heavenspan forces, only half of their original force of Devas remained. As for the 4 demigod patriarchs, so far, none had been killed. However, all of them had taken severe injuries. Considering that the Heavenspan forces had suffered such mind-boggling casualties, and yet still maintained the upper hand, it was possible to imagine how disastrous this war was for the Wildlands. Of the savage tribes that had once made up the bulk of the Wildlands forces, most had been wiped out. 70% of the heavenly marquises had perished, and nearly half of the heavenly dukes had been killed in body and soul. All of the cities of the 4 heavenly kings had been burned to the ground. The giant ghost king's army was mostly intact, but the armies of the other 3 heavenly kings had suffered roughly 80% casualties. The vast difference between the giant ghost king's forces and those of the other heavenly kings was all because of Bai Xiaochun. Not only had he stopped the fighting between the Eastern Heavenspan cultivators and the Wildlanders at Giant Ghost City, but he had also killed 3 of the Heavenspan arcane guards and destroyed their spell formation. The other 3 cities had been routed, and the flight of their armies hampered because of the spell formations. And thus, those battles had nearly turned into massacres. By now, the Wildlanders were completely surrounded, with 90% of their territory lost. The only thing that remained was Arch-Emperor City. Arch-Emperor City was where the Wildlanders would make their final stand. If that city fell, then it would mean that the bloodline of the Arch-Emperors was gone forever. The cultivators from the 4 rivers were encamped around Arch-Emperor City. Of course, the Heavenspan cultivators still couldn't help but feel exhausted, and were filled with mixed emotions. It was an exhaustion that ran so deep that most of them were expressionless and numb. As the years of fighting wore on, virtually all of the cultivators had lost friends and loved ones. However, there was another death that none of the cultivators from either side of the conflict were aware of. Bai Hao. Because of his death, the underworld river had dried up, and the dead souls within it could no longer return to the cycle of reincarnation. They had no choice but to wander heaven and earth. It was easy to imagine how such a situation quickly became another catastrophe to plague the world. It also became a powerful portent. Eventually, the Wildlander soul cultivators began to speculate about what it meant. The new Hell Emperor must have perished. Such speculations inundated the soul cultivators like floodwaters, causing them to tremble and sink further into the darkness of despair. To them, it seemed like the end of the world was nigh. Even the Grand Heaven Master and the demigod experts felt their hearts being overtaken by anxiety and gloom. The 4 heavenly kings' cities had been routed. 90% of their armies were dead. The Heavenspan forces had Arch-Emperor City surrounded. To the people of the Arch-Emperor dynasty, those things all became a massive blow to any hope for survival that anyone had. But the death of the Hell Emperor was even more unimaginable. It was like an attack that landed directly on their hearts and minds. Those 2 heavy blows had the Arch-Emperor dynasty reeling. In fact, if the Celestial had offered an opportunity for surrender, the Grand Heaven Master and the other leaders would have definitely been tempted to take it. Except, the Celestial didn't seem to care about human life at all. He would accept no surrender. He wanted the wildlands wiped away, all the way down to the grass and roots. Such orders had long since been passed down to the demigod patriarchs of the 4 river source sects. In their exhaustion, they had begun the assault on Arch-Emperor City with all the power they had at their disposal. Their task was to completely destroy it. The decisive battle was beginning. Booms rang out constantly outside of Arch-Emperor City. It was a precious treasure with powerful defensive shields, but they were being worn down, and could not stand forever against the divine abilities and magical techniques that battered them. The giant Ghost Legion, and the armies of the other 3 heavenly kings, bolstered the innate defensive powers of Arch-Emperor City, giving it the power to make its final stand. Blood-curdling shrieks rang out, booms of self-detonation filled the air. Shouting and howling could be heard all over the battlefield. The corpse troopers that had once struck fear into the hearts of the Wildlanders were now fully deployed onto the battlefield, and yet, they didn't seem to have much effect on the conflict as a whole. High above, the demigods fought with utter desperation. The 4 heavenly kings and the Grand Heaven Master had all suffered horrific injuries, and yet, were still going all out. As for the Heavenspan forces, they had their 4 demigod patriarchs, as well as 2 divine guards from Heavenspan Island. A total of 11 demigods clashed above, causing the entire world to tremble as if it might collapse. The Arch-Emperor stood in the highest tower of the Imperial Palace, looking out at the fighting. A gloomy expression covered his face, but he had a bit of hope in his eyes, hope that the Gravekeeper would eventually show his face. He had no idea that Bai Xiaochun was already in Arch-Emperor City. In his mind, the Gravekeeper was the only hope of the Arch-Emperor dynasty. The Arch-Emperor wasn't the only one who waited with such anticipation. The Grand Heaven Master and the 4 heavenly kings all harbored a similar hope, as did many of the soul cultivators fighting down below. The new Hell Emperor Bai Hao was important in the Arch-Emperor dynasty. But to the soul cultivators, he was like the earth, whereas the Gravekeeper was like the vast heavens. Only if the Gravekeeper appeared, could the tide turn. But even as the cultivators of the Arch-Emperor dynasty continued to place their hope in the Gravekeeper, all of Arch-Emperor City suddenly shook violently. The lands around it quaked, and massive crevices snaked out everywhere. In the blink of an eye, an aura of death spread out from Arch-Emperor City, filling all of the wildlands. And things were just beginning. That aura of death continued on to fill all of the lands of Heavenspan. Mountains seemed to lose their strength and collapse. Jungles began to wilt and crumble into ash. It was as if the surface of the world were collapsing. Although it didn't explode, the aura of death that filled it was plain for everyone to detect. It wasn't just the ground that was affected. The sky in the wildlands and in the Heavenspan region began to turn as gray, as if no life force existed in it at all. Apparently, the entire world was dying. Cultivators, mortals, and all other living beings were suddenly filled with the most profound unease. It felt as if the entire world were about to fade away into eternity. All of the cultivators in and around Arch-Emperor City suddenly stopped fighting, and looked around in shock. Those from the Heavenspan region seemed confused, whereas the Wildlander soul cultivators were so stunned that many of them staggered in place. Looks of terror could be seen in their eyes, as well as profound grief that soon turned into rage. The Arch-Emperor shivered, his eyes lighting up with disbelief as he murmured, "The Gravekeeper has perished. The world is dying." Then he began to laugh bitterly for a moment before a wave of exhaustion overcame him. Staggering backward, he coughed up a massive mouthful of blood. "There will be no more Arch-Emperors. We will burn along with the Imperial City." He closed his eyes. The Grand Heaven Master and the 4 heavenly kings looked around with blank expressions and blanker minds. They had all known that the gravekeeper was very weak, but the realization that he had actually perished filled them with despair. It was made worse by the fact that, along with the death of the gravekeeper, the world itself seemed to be crumbling. The demigod patriarchs of the 4 river source sects were all shaken to the core. However, after looking around momentarily, their eyes lit up with determination. Taking advantage of the sudden blow to the morale of the wildlanders, they joined forces in a final salvo to destroy the city. In the briefest of moments, fierce fighting broke out again. Mountain toppling, sea draining force, slammed into Arch-Emperor City. The defensive shields of the city finally shattered, and the city walls began to fall. The wildlanders were being pushed back by defeat after defeat. As for the Heavenspan cultivators, most of them just wanted to be done with the fighting, and thus, killing intent once again rose from within their numbed minds and hearts. The 4 demigod patriarchs and the 2 divine guards reacted similarly. Blood sprayed out of the mouths of the 4 heavenly kings, and even the Grand Heaven Master was shoved backward. There was no hope for the wildlanders. Only despair. There was no way they could defend themselves from this onslaught. At this point, their minds and wills began to collapse, forcing them to howl in madness. Even as Arch-Emperor City seemed to be on the verge of falling, fluctuations exploded out from within it that seemed to affect the rapidly spreading aura of death. Down below in the 3rd section of the city, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes. His left eye was golden, and his right eye was crystalline. They were eyes that were no longer pure and innocent. After opening, heaven and earth went dim, and the entire world quaked, as if from the hatred contained therein. As Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes, a blast of wind filled the 3rd level of the city, which rose higher and higher, and then erupted out into the open. The intensity of the fluctuations caused everyone outside to be shaken to the core. On Heavenspan Island, the Blood Ancestor was still fighting the Celestial, but had been seriously injured, and was hovering on the verge of death. But when he felt those fluctuations, he suddenly began to laugh hoarsely. Heavenspan, you lowlife, do you feel that? The Celestial's face had already been green and livid, and now, it turned even more unsightly. Turning to look in the direction of Arch-Emperor City, he said a single name through gritted teeth. Bai Xiaochun. In Arch-Emperor City, the giant ghost king shivered. Expression flickering with disbelief, he looked down toward the ground, clearly more shaken than he had been when he had detected the death of the gravekeeper. He wasn't the only one to react in such a way. The Spirit Advent King, 9 Serenities King and War Champion King all gasped and looked down at the ground, their expressions those of disbelief. The Grand Heaven Master was also shocked, and despite the level of his willpower, couldn't stop from uttering an exclamation. This aura, the entire world shook as the grayness of death which filled the sky began to swirl into a huge vortex. It was as if the world, in its final death throes, was using its last bit of energy to cry out for the final time. The demigod patriarchs of the 4 river source sects, as well as the divine guards from Heavenspan, were visibly taken aback. All 6 suddenly felt profoundly uneasy, a feeling which rapidly transformed into terror. Patriarch Starry Sky was especially terrified. Glancing down at the ground in astonishment, he realized that this aura was very familiar to him. Bai Xiaochun. Meanwhile, the Arch-Emperor was in the Imperial Palace, his eyes shining with astonishment. He could sense much better than everyone else that, deep beneath the ground, there were fluctuations that resonated with the aura of his own blood. In fact, the intensity of these fluctuations surpassed his own. To the Arch-Emperor, it seemed completely impossible, and yet, it was happening right here and now. As the world was shaken, winds screamed in the lower regions of Arch-Emperor City. Bai Xiaochun sat there cross-legged, his eyes open, unmoving. Instead of rising to his feet, he simply took in a long, deep breath. With that breath, his undying live forever technique completed the last of its fusion. His cultivation base was now in perfect condition. He was at the peak of the demigod level when it came to his fleshly body, and his cultivation base was in the early demigod realm. When those powers merged, his aura seemed ancient and archaic, and so powerful that the entire world was willing to acquiesce to him. He felt like the ruler of the entire world. It felt like the entire world approved of him. A single thought from him could cause all living things to submit. His gaze could cause mountains and rivers to rise up out of nothing. It was a level of power Bai Xiaochun had never experienced before. And yet, it didn't make him happy. Instead, his complicated feelings grew even more gloomy. This power had come at the sacrifice of Du Lingfei and Bai Hao. In fact, countless other lives in the world had been cast away. Had he been given the choice, Bai Xiaochun would never have chosen to do this. But the Gravekeeper made the choice for him. The Gravekeeper had been willing to sacrifice anyone and everyone to accomplish his mission. Therefore, Bai Xiaochun was both grateful and at the same time filled with hatred. The emotions he felt were profoundly complicated and conflicted. He was grateful to the gravekeeper for saving his life and for bestowing incredible good fortune onto him. But that gratitude could not make up for the death of Bai Hao and the misery of Du Lingfei. And thus, he was filled with hatred. Hatred at his own powerlessness, and hatred toward the gravekeeper for everything he had done to accomplish his so-called mission. And yet, that hatred could not wipe away his gratitude for having his own life saved, and for being blessed with good fortune. In the end, he could only be battered by complicated and mixed emotions. However, in the final analysis, it was Taoist Heavenspan who had truly orchestrated the greatest villainy. And therefore, Bai Xiaochun's hatred for him towered to the heavens. Bai Xiaochun knew that with the gravekeeper having perished, it wouldn't be long before the entire world crumbled. When that happened, it would truly become an enormous tomb for everyone who lived on it. He could sense the epic battle being fought on Heavenspan Island, and he could sense the bad condition Arch-Emperor City was in. A long moment passed, and then he spoke in a voice that surpassed heavenly thunder in its intensity. So many people dead, Taoist Heavenspan, why are you still alive? Energy surging mightily, he slowly stood up. As he did, the cultivators outside of Arch-Emperor City felt as though earth dragons were writhing beneath the ground. Everyone was so shocked that they didn't dare to keep fighting, they all began to back away from each other. They instinctively began to feel terror and dread, regardless of the level of their cultivation base. Even the demigods felt that way. As the ground quaked, Bai Xiaochun took a step forward. The instant his foot touched the ground in front of him, he vanished, to appear in mid-air above Arch-Emperor City. In that same moment, the vortex up above began to emit intense rumbling sounds. Even as the world seemed to be descending into the gray of death, multicolored light erupted out from Bai Xiaochun to shine on everything around him. This light filled the world, deeply shaking all cultivators. Gasps could be heard as everyone looked up at Bai Xiaochun, their cultivation bases trembling, their souls shaking. Deep within the very being of everyone present, they suddenly felt something tugging at them, as if from within their blood. It was reverence for the first-generation Arch-Emperor. Within the imperial palace, the reigning Arch-Emperor trembled, and his eyes began to shine. He more than anyone else could sense that he was not looking at the same Bai Xiaochun that he had seen in the past. This Bai Xiaochun seemed like the first-generation Arch-Emperor, Arch-Ancestor. It was a reverence and respect that came from within his blood. Because of it, the reigning Arch-Emperor immediately dropped to his knees. Although he had been turned into little more than a puppet ruler by the Grand Heaven Master, and would never have bent the knee to the man, he was now kneeling to Bai Xiaochun. In the past, the only person he would ever have done the same thing to was the gravekeeper. Kui Endao offers greetings, Arch-Ancestor. 1. As the Arch-Emperor dropped to his knees, other figures flew up into the air to offer enthusiastic greetings, all of them descendants of the Arch-Emperor bloodline. Their cries rolled out into Arch-Emperor City, to be heard by the soul cultivators, heavenly marquises, and heavenly dukes. As they heeded the instinctual calls from their souls, they began to drop down and kowtow to Bai Xiaochun. Greetings, Arch-Ancestor. Greetings, Arch-Ancestor. As the fanatical cries of the soul cultivators filled the air, the giant Ghost King and his fellow demigods, as well as the 6 demigods from the lands of Heavenspan, all reacted with open shock. Even they, mighty demigods, felt their souls tugging at them, telling them to do what all of the other cultivators down below were doing. It was something that was branded into their souls as people of this world, a mark left upon anyone and everyone from the moment they were born. As of this moment, it was telling them that Bai Xiaochun was their emperor. The power radiating out from Bai Xiaochun's blood caused their hearts to fill with reverence, and left them totally shaken by the unprecedentedly powerful pressure that weighed down from him. The giant Ghost King was the first to react. Bowing deeply, he said, "Greetings, Arch-Ancestor." Next came the Spirit Advent King, the 9 Serenities King, and then the War Champion King. After that was the Grand Heaven Master, whose eyes were filled with profound emotion and deep respect. There was even more pressure crushing down onto the 6 experts from the lands of Heavenspan. They trembled both from the pressure of the celestial and the instinctual reverence that came from their souls. All 6 were almost immediately overwhelmed. They struggled for a long moment, until Bai Xiaochun looked over at them, seemingly connecting to their souls, and filling their reeling minds with waves of shock. At that point, all of them, even Patriarch Starry Sky, averted their gazes, and bowed in respectful greeting. As they did, all of the cultivators from the Heavenspan region felt similar prompting from their souls, and began to bow. Mighty waves of sound filled the entire wildlands. Greetings, Arch-ancestor. Bai Xiaochun had long dreamed of having so many people looking at him, to have crowds worshipping his glory. But right now, these things gave him no pleasure. He looked around at the groveling masses for a moment, then turned his attention to Heavenspan Island. Almost immediately, his eyes turned as red as blood, and began to radiate an intense murderous aura. Ignoring everyone else, he blurred into motion, becoming a blast of wind that left even the demigods shaken as he headed toward Heavenspan Island. As he closed in, he spoke in a voice that battered the ears of everyone in the world, a voice filled with hatred and madness. Taoist Heavenspan, why are you still alive? Rumbling sounds echoed out without cease. Crevices and ravines continued to open up everywhere in the wildlands, made worse by the shocking energy radiating out from Bai Xiaochun. Countless mountain peaks crumbled, and numerous plains caved in. The entire world seemed to be breaking apart. The energy at play here seemed to be more than the world could handle, to the point where even the sky began to crack into pieces. All living beings were overwhelmed by the sensation that they were experiencing an apocalypse. Cities trembled, and sects were shaken. Living creatures everywhere sensed that the end was nigh. Cultivators from both the wildlands and the Heavenspan region all sensed the same thing, that the world was dying around them. Unless someone or something intervened, it wouldn't be very long before the world cracked to pieces. It actually had nothing to do with Bai Xiaochun himself. The process began in the moment that the gravekeeper died. As everyone in the world looked around in astonishment, Bai Xiaochun sped through the wildlands toward Heavenspan Island, his energy skyrocketing the entire way. There almost seemed to be no end in sight, as though the hatred and anger in Bai Xiaochun's heart would continue to push his energy higher and higher no matter what happened. Soon, he was in the deadmire. There were no longer any restrictive spells locking the area down or protecting it, and as such, it was also beginning to fill with crevices and rifts. Heaven and earth were changing. The end of days had come. Bai Xiaochun could tell that beyond the shadow of a doubt. The hatred and anger in his heart manifested as a virtually undispellable murderous aura. His killing intent toward the celestial burned with the ultimate madness. He yelled at the top of his lungs as he shot through the air, his eyes crimson with rage. He had never been like this before in his life, so consumed with hatred that it didn't even occur to him to be scared of death. He didn't care about his desire to live forever. The only things he could think about were Du Lingfei's bitter tears, and how Bai Hao had kowtowed to him before passing away. Those two images were like sharp knives that stabbed through his heart all the way into his soul. He was truly insane. Taoist Heavenspan. It was as if Bai Xiaochun had been reborn out of death, and none of his happiness had been passed on to the new version of him. The only thing that had been passed on was his desire to kill the celestial. He demanded blood, the blood of the celestial. Never could he forget the look in Du Lingfei's eyes when the celestial pushed her head toward his. She hadn't wanted to hurt him, but had been given no choice. He could never forget how Bai Hao had burned himself into nothing to save him. Bai Xiaochun wanted to cry, but at the moment, there were no tears. Rage and enmity had burned them away, turning him into a being that sought only vengeance. Although he had been driven into madness, he still possessed all his faculties. He knew that the celestial was incredibly powerful, and that although he himself had reached the great circle of the undying live forever technique, he would probably die if he fought him. Unless he achieved a cultivation-based breakthrough, and truly stepped into the Mahayana realm, he wouldn't have the battle prowess to crush the celestial. But that didn't reduce his killing intent by even an iota. After all, he still had a trump card at his disposal, that being the world treasure of the North. Normally speaking, he wouldn't use it, considering the heavy price that would be paid to do so. But now, the world was already crumbling around him. I have other tools at my disposal as well, other than the world treasure of the North. Even as Bai Xiaochun burst out of the deadmire and entered the lands of Heavenspan, his mind spun with numerous ideas and plans. The Undying Codex has 5 secret magics. As for the Live Forever Codex, it also has 5 powerful divine abilities. However, they're manifested in a different way. Once someone has mastered the entire Live Forever Codex, then the magic will take shape according to their personal Tao. Within Bai Xiaochun's mind floated 5 divine abilities that he had created after mastering the Live Forever Codex, divine abilities which were powerful enough to destroy anything in creation. Each person who cultivated the Live Forever Codex would produce different divine abilities. As for Bai Xiaochun's, they were an amalgamation of his subconscious mind, and the Taoist magics that he had cultivated in his life. And he was confident that, by combining them with the fleshly body power provided by the Undying Codex, they would make him far more formidable than anyone who had mastered a single one of the codices. And I also have my moonflower. Eyes shining as he pierced through the air, he suddenly waved his finger in the direction of the north and sent a stream of divine scents in that very direction. Moonflower, baby. In response to his call, countless moonflowers suddenly burst into the air from the jungles and ravines in the north. They became like a cloud of dandelion seeds that streamed high up into the sky. From what he could tell, there were millions upon millions of them, filling the sky as they swirled together into the shape of an enormous moon. At a certain point, they vanished, to appear right next to Bai Xiaochun. Seemingly delighted, the moonflowers swirled around Bai Xiaochun, each and every one of them radiating a sense of familiarity and love. For the first time, Bai Xiaochun's freezing heart warmed slightly. Moonflower, baby, are you willing to help me fight? The response from the massive collection of moonflowers was a burst of fearless battle spirit. Bai Xiaochun smiled in response. However, his eyes were fixed on Heavenspan Island, and they were as cold as ice. Without the slightest hesitation or anxiety, he suddenly summoned his turtle walk. In response to the calling of his will, the millions upon millions of dandelion seeds began to converge together, eventually transforming into a single seed, which shot toward the turtle walk. Bai Xiaochun had already made the decision that, in order to make his moonflower stronger, he would bless it with a spirit enhancement. Although he couldn't conjure a 22-colored flame, considering the level of his cultivation base, producing a 21-colored flame was nothing difficult. He waved his hand, causing countless vengeful souls to stream toward him. As they did, he started with a 1-colored flame, and conjured all the way up to a 20-colored flame, using them to push the moonflower all the way to a 20-fold spirit enhancement. Then he conjured a 21-colored flame. He didn't hesitate for a moment to throw that flame into the turtle walk. Instantly, rumbling sounds echoed out, and bright light began to shine out of the lines on the walk. Gradually, the design of the spirit enhancement appeared on the moonflower. Its aura was now vastly different than before. As its energy surged, it began to grow larger and larger, until it was a 30,000-meter tall, shocking flower. Even more astonishing was the fact that it radiated the aura of the great circle of the demigod realm. However, it still seemed to view him just as lovingly as before. Accelerating, he had the moonflower shrink down, and then tossed it in his bag of holding. Soon, he was flying over the Heavenspan Sea. Cracks could be heard as rifts were torn open into the air, none of which showed any signs of closing back up. As he passed over the sea, the nearby water froze up. Bai Xiaochun's explosive aura was reaching a pinnacle, and his eyes were completely fixed on Heavenspan Island. As he closed in, he could see the blood ancestor, his entire body wreathed in flames, going all out to deliver a shocking fist strike. When the blow landed, a huge vortex sprang up, and the blood ancestor began to fade away. You're finally here, Bai Xiaochun. My mission is accomplished. Help me to take care of her. The blood ancestor threw his head back and laughed uproariously. He had given his life to lock down the celestial, and therefore a gleam of contentment could be seen in his eyes as he looked in the direction of the north, and then faded out of existence. He didn't specify who he wanted Bai Xiaochun to take care of. He was sure that Bai Xiaochun already knew. Bai Xiaochun nodded at the blood ancestor as he faded away. Then, he fixed his bloodshot, livid gaze at the celestial, who hovered in the air above the island. Taoist Heavenspan, he said, the words crackling like heavenly thunder. Heaven and earth crumbled around them. The most breathtaking battle of all time was about to begin. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.